Oh, hello there, one and all. And you see here that I have a nice floppy softback in my hand, Clash of Kings 2019 edition. And I'm going to delve into the Goblin section in that book, so this is not going to be a very long video. And see if this stream is a complete disaster, since I've tried a different way of live streaming on YouTube yet again. See if anyone actually watches it with no prior announcement as well. That'll be interesting. So, the Goblin section. I'm not going to show you the whole book because I'm sure there's lots of copyrighted material in here. So, there's only 2 pages of juicy Goblin content, but there are a couple of rules earlier on in the book that do affect Goblin units as well, which I will go to as necessary. So, first of all, if we look here, there's certain things that aren't very different from the previous Clash of Kings book, but there are others that are quite a significant change. So there's a little bit of a minor one. First of all, exactly the same, more beasts, still only hit on a 4 instead of 3, which has seen them, at least on my battlefield, they've seen far less action. And I haven't seen too many of them in other people's armies since that change either. I wouldn't say it was exactly their saving grace, but it did definitely help because they were a little bit of a glass cannon. Now they're more like a glass musket, let's say, short range, but still glass and not quite as powerful. Trombones still down to 10 attacks from 12. They're still possibly too good for their points. It's still an auto include if you ask me, and that's not changed. Fleabag chariots, the nerve increases. They're still the same as well. The king on a chariot now has nimble, which he did before. Anything else? And the unit changes. Fleabag rider, horde, increased nerve. The mincer has actually undertaken significant changes here. So, used to be Thunderous Charge 3 and Yellow-Bellied. It's no longer Yellow-Bellied, which is nice. It's dropped its Thunderous Charge to 1, and it's gained Crushing Strength 1. So, potentially, that's actually made it worse, but in most circumstances, I would say that's going to be an improvement. Let's think, the times you would be looking to use the mincer, a lot of the time you wouldn't put it near terrain to begin with. If you've been using mincers for a long time, you're used to not setting them up near anything that would give them a hindered charge, because that was reducing their Thunderous Charge. It does take away 100% of their Thunderous Charge now, compared to just 33% of their previous Thunderous Charge. So they'll be losing all their Thunderous when they make hindered charge now, but they do have the Crushing, which is never going anywhere, which is nice. Also, when they charge into a Phalanx unit, then again, they're actually better off than they were because they're gaining the Crushing Strength now, and they're only having 1 of their attack bonuses reduced instead of all 3 when they previously went into Phalanx units, which is nice. The Yellow-Bellied going away is very nice indeed. By the way, I think people can chat on this live video. I've not tried setting this up before, but there is a chat window. So if anyone's actually watching this, then let me know. Because we are live here, for anyone who actually catches this live. Then, Yellow-Bellied going away from mincer, very nice indeed. They were unreliable, really. Their nerve isn't that high, so the fact that they take a little bit of damage and they would often become wavered, that was made doubly ineffective by the fact that they were Yellow-Bellied. So even when they're not wavered, then every now and then they're just going to refuse to charge for you. And having the Thunderous Charge 3 meant that it was quite easy to remove that from them compared to the Crushing Strength, which they now have. So all those changes pretty much make it much more reliable, which I like. Then the Slasher has been replaced with a totally different unit, which we'll get to in a minute. Because let's face it, nobody took a Slasher, no one in their right mind anyway, or no one that was in any way experienced. Spitters are now irregular. I have no issue with that. Same things happen to some of the other races, at least Rordia. And no issues at all. I've never really spammed Spitters, so it's not going to affect me. There are some people that have taken lists with just endless amounts of Spitters that would no longer be able to do that. If I've taken a Goblin Gunline list, it's mainly been built around Rock Lobbers and War Trombones rather than Spitters. so it shouldn't affect me. It might mean that some of my tried and tested Goblin lists don't work anymore because I was running it quite tight on the unlock slots. So I may have to replace any splitters I did have in there with something else if I want to keep everything else the same. If I want to run the list again with the 4 rock lobbers, 3 war trombones, and various other goodness. So we've got additional units. I think Grogger's Split Tooth and Grogger's Goons are exactly the same, from what I can tell. I've never actually used them, but it looks like they're the same. Your pretty standard non-yellow-bellied goblins with regeneration. And I don't recall actually seeing them on the table ever, either against me or I certainly haven't used them myself. Then we've got a totally new unit, which is the Mincer Mob. So you can now take a regiment of 3 mincers. So what they're really saying is you can take a regiment of 2 mincers on a base size that would suggest there should be 3 on there, because the mincer does not even fit on the base it comes on, really. So there's no way you'd cram 3 of them together on 1 regiment base. The wheels actually ever so slightly overhang the edges, even if you don't put any sides on them or any kind of spokes or anything. So it's going to be 2 mincers, I'm afraid, there, Mantic, in the regiment. Then let's have a look at the stats here. So it seems to have the same stats as a mincer in terms of speed and the melee and the defense. Same with the big shield. The attacks is d6 plus 24. So that is quite a significant amount of attacks there. Obviously, the mincer is d6 plus 6. So you're getting more attacks for your points with that. Nerve 14, 16. So, of course, it's not going to have the same nerve as just lots of mincers running around on their own. If you look at the total amount of nerve, points 220. So that seems like a fairly decent addition to me. I could do with the nerve being slightly higher, but with the big shield, if you position it well enough, especially now that it's wider than it is deep, then you shouldn't be attacked in the flank that often anyway, if you're positioning it carefully, which you should be doing with something like this at that price. So I could definitely see myself fielding a unit of these, not yellow-bellied still, which is nice. Let's see, Guy in the chat says, I love the sound of the mincer mob. That's going to paste things it comes in contact with. Yes, it certainly is. Because traditionally I've taken trolls for the role of turning things into mush, but they're decent at it, but they don't normally take things out in one go. This mincer mob certainly could take things out in one go. This could be the ultimate killer unit that we've been waiting for. Of course, it's speed 5, so it's a little bit slower than other armies' ultra killy units. If we look at things like Honor Guard, Soul Reaver Cavalry, the things I would always look at as one-hit kill units. Then we now have access to the Goblin Blaster, which is nice, 65 points, and it explodes. So this has been available to the ogres with the Red Goblin Blaster for some time, but now the actual goblins have it, finally, which is nice. So I think a lot of the parts are the same as the various chariots and the mincer models. It just has a load of exploding barrels on it. Let's see, it's not yellow-bellied, height 3. Let's see, so the exact damage, because of course I've never used one of these. So it does, anyone within D6 inches of the blaster, 2d6 hits at piercing 4. So yes, very nice. So better than something like the Pendant of Retribution in some ways. That I think that only affects units that are actually attacking it. This just affects everything nearby. So potentially worse, because you could get your own models blown up if you put them too close to it. But you'd have to be pretty foolish to put it in amongst your lines anyway. So it'd be nice to try out a nice exploding kind of kamikaze unit at some point. Then we have here Grogger's Great Lobber has returned, but it's, I'm not going to say drastically different, but it has changed. So it now has big shield. So does that mean they're planning to release a rock lobber that has a big shield in front of it as a model, and they just wanted to throw that in there so it makes sense? I'm not sure. It's not elite anymore, so it's not going to hit as often as it did. Although elite didn't really help it that much. for still 100 points. Its blast is only d6 plus 2 instead of d6 plus 3 now, so it's the same as a normal rock lobber now. Piercing 3, still the same. So they've taken away elite and one of its hits, and they've given it big shield, and it's still the same points. If I'm running the ultimate rock lobber list, it would still go in there for 100 points, because I would have run just a 4th regular rock lobber, even if the 4th one cost 100 points in that list. So the fact that it's got big shield, there are options with that. If there's somewhere on the battlefield you want to position a rock lobber where it's likely to come under threat from enemy shooting, then maybe you would choose this one to go in that particular spot with the big shield. Far less likely to take damage. And of course, rock lobbers, the nerve being 9, 11, really enemy shooting would be wanting to do 3 or 4 damage at least before they're thinking about maybe wavering it. Shooting isn't the preferred way to take down something like this, because obviously if you don't waver it, it can still shoot the next turn. You want to be hitting it in close combat. But anything that's hitting it in close combat generally, a lot of the time it'll be things that are really fast and sneaking around the side. If something's coming in the front, then of course it's going to have to deal with the big shield. So things that would be coming in the front include flying heroes or mounted heroes that just haven't positioned themselves cleverly enough to get you flank. So it doesn't really affect whether I take it or not, but it is slightly worse, which I think is fair enough, because the ultimate rock lobber list is very tasty, as you may have seen. Then the slasher, which is very, very different. So previously it was cheaper than the giant, and everything it did was slightly worse than a giant, except you could pay more to put a sharp stick thrower on its back, which wasn't that useful, because if you're standing still to shoot at maximum effect, you really have a very expensive sharp stick thrower. And if you're moving forward to join in with the fighting, then you're really having a very inaccurate sharp stick thrower until it gets into a fight, at which point it becomes a very mediocre giant. So it was a little bit poor at all its different roles, the original slasher. It was okay in very specific gunline lists where you needed something for when the enemy reached you. You'd have some things then charge out and fight, and it could still contribute to the shooting. But I don't think it was ever really worth it. I don't think there was a time where you wouldn't have been better off just having a separate war machine and then a unit to do the job that the slasher was going to do when the enemy got there. But if for some reason you had some kind of OCD obsession with every unit having some kind of shooting attack, then maybe I could have seen it used. But the new one is very, very different. So it now hits on a 3+. Pretty sure it used to be 4. It has 9 attacks. I think that's the same. Nerve 17, 19, so its nerve has gone up. I'm pretty sure it used to be 14, 16, the slasher, which I always thought was quite poor for a big monster. 220 points, so it's got more expensive. So what have we got for that then? Let's have a look what additional rules it's gained for that huge points increase. So it's now on a 75mm base. So anyone that had a slasher previously, you can have to put it inside a bigger base now. At least they've not made the base smaller. That's always the nightmare. Crushing Strength 3. I think it only had Crushing 2 and Thunderous 1 before. So Crushing Strength, of course, always more reliable. Piercing 2. Because it just comes with the sharp stick thrower by default now, you don't have the option. Steady aim, which is a new rule, it means you don't suffer the -1 for moving and shooting. So it's kind of like nimble, except you're not nimble. You just have the shooting benefits of being nimble only, which is useful for something like this. Strider as well, and it's not yellow belly. So that means that you can actually move up with the rest of the army while shooting without taking the -1 to hit. So hitting on 5s with the sharp stick thrower while moving up is actually a viable tactic now. And with speed 7, so you wouldn't be lagging too much behind, depending what else is in your list. Obviously, if you're just rampaging forward with cavalry, it's not really going to keep up and still shoot. But if it's just moving up with your regular infantry or slightly behind them, moving up 7 inches, firing off 2 shots with the bolt thrower, or the sharp stick thrower, should I say, maybe you'll get hits, which will then blast D3. So I'd say that's a big improvement. It's more survivable, and you're not paying the price for moving when it comes to shooting the sharp stick thrower now. It's just more expensive. Can I see it being taken at this price? I would say yes. Can I see it overtaking the giant? that's a tougher one because it is 30 more points than the giant. So that's going to be more interesting. Much bigger base than a giant. But of course, it does have the shooting potential. So if you're taking a bit of a gun line, and it's just balanced now. Previously, it was balanced, but everything it could do was subpar. Now it's balanced, and everything it can do is actually pretty good. It's just got more expensive at the same time. So I was hoping the slasher would just remain the same, but get slightly better. Remain the same in points, but improve slightly. But I'll take it. Now, Guy has said he likes the sound of the new guiding light spell with War Machines. Yes, that's something I was going to come to, so I'll just come to that now since you've mentioned it. And the guiding light spell, I believe it's 1 use per game, but that may be all you need, because if you're taking the Ultimate Rocklobber list, and then you have this spell, let's see. Okay, here we go. So for 15 points, Guiding Light 2, 12-inch range, which is fine because we've got really the fastest wizards available in the game if you put them on a Fleabag. Hits don't inflict damage. Instead, if one or more hits are scored, for the remainder of their shoot phase, any war engines with the indirect fire or reload special rules gain +1 to hit when targeting the unit the spell has been cast on. Once a hit is scored by the spell, it may not be used again by this caster for the remainder of the game. Okay, so that's quite different from 1 use only. So it's once it's actually succeeded, then you can't use it again, which is much better because the worst thing you want, the last thing you need is paying for a spell that then fails and you can't use it again. So it only can't be used again once it's already succeeded, unless the wizard gets killed, obviously. But really, this is going to be like the perfect. If you're going second, for example, obviously, if you have 4 Rocklobbers, your opponents, if they get the choice, they're probably going to make you go second, and they're going to move up as fast as possible. So you could get this in your turn 1, move the wizard up to within 12 inches, cast this on an enemy unit that you want to direct your war machines at. If you can position them all right, then you could be hitting on a 4+ on that unit with all your Rocklobbers. So if you've got 4, you're going to be looking at 2 hits there at least, hopefully. That would be pretty damn tasty. So I would definitely give that a try for any 15 points. It's kind of a no-brainer that if you're taking the quadruple Rocklobber list. Let's see. Guy says, any model suggestions for the blaster? Well, apart from the actual blaster that they have, which is in the Ogre list, I don't know if it's still available on the website. I haven't looked lately. But if you can't find the actual red Goblin blaster from the Ogres, then there's always the option of just grabbing some kind of chariot or a mincer and just piling barrels on it. Something that looks like it's going to explode. It doesn't need to look like it can move fast. It's only speed 5. So if anyone has any other model suggestions, there were actually some of the balls that I use for my more beasts, some of the others in the range, they're not available anymore, I don't think, all those balls from Macrocosm, but there were some that looked like floating mines. I would have liked to have used them, but I think they're actually permanently sold out. Okay, so we've looked at the Slasher, which is a big improvement, but also become more expensive. The Colossal Giant now, which a few races have access to. So the Colossal Giant is on the 75mm base. The one I have for my Ogres is actually on a 100mm base, I think, so he would easily fit the role as this giant, but not in my Goblin army. So the Colossal Giant, speed 7, melee 4, defense 5, so same as the giant so far, but attacks d6 plus 10 instead of d6 plus 6, so a bit more juicy at fighting, and the nerve is -20, so it's not going to make them wavered at all, because anyone that's had their giant wavered from shooting will know the pain of that. Obviously, if it got wavered in combat, it didn't mind, unless you wanted to charge a unit that wasn't attacking you. With a bit of corkscrew, for example, 235 points, so it's 45 more points than the regular giant. Brutal, same as the giant, usually crushing strength 4 instead of 3, so against certain units that's going to be very handy. Strider, vicious against infantry only. So that kind of balances out, because the kind of units you'll want to use the crushing strength 4 against mainly aren't going to be infantry, I would suggest. You don't get a lot of infantry at defense 6. So the fact that they are vicious against infantry kind of balances that out, I would say. So even if you send them into something with lower defense, you're going to have vicious against it if they're infantry. So pretty tasty, not yellow-bellied, obviously. So that looks like a viable option as well. Dead Gamer is watching live here, admiring the tinsel in the background. So I'm sure you're very engrossed in my analysis of Clash of Kings 2019 edition, the Goblin section here, which is going to take too much longer, I think. We've only got a few more entries to look at here. So the Colossal Giant, if you've got the really big giant on a bigger base, definitely worth a look. With this Slasher and Colossal Giant as monster options now, is the regular giant going to see much play at all? Obviously, if you've only got a certain amount of points left over, and that's the only big monster you can afford, then certainly. But these two are looking very, very juicy. It's just the fact that they are slightly more expensive, the Slasher and the Colossal Giant, definitely giving the regular giant something to think about. Then we've got another unit, Cuzlo and Madfall, which is the Whiz on a Liz from Vanguard. And this creature, speed 8, melee 3+, defense 4, attacks 5, nerve 12, 14, 145 points. So not that cheap. If you're looking for heroes, it's a little bit more expensive than the likes of a Troll Bruiser, for example. Crushing strength 2, height 2. He only inspires himself, weirdly enough. So a bit of an egomaniac, but no one else around is buying into it. Nimble, Pathfinder, Regeneration 4+, Vicious. So there's a big pile of special rules on there. Ravenous Lizard. While within 6 inches of this unit, all units, both friend and foe, have -1 to their nerve, basically. To their waiver and route values. So you don't really want him around your own troops, necessarily. It's just interesting, something that could possibly be run on its own. And is it really built for that task, though? Let's see. Spell Siphon, 2 for 15 points is an option you can take. So Spell Siphon is new, which I'm going to go and look at now, because that is actually quite an interesting spell. 18-inch range, enemy units that have the ability to cast a spell, blah, blah, blah. Hits do not cause damage. Instead, 1 or more hits are scored. The unit which casts this spell can immediately cast one of the target's spells, with the exception of Surge. I'm sure there's some kind of reason that they left Surge out of that. There must be. Casting the opponent's spell uses the same number of dice available to the enemy unit, but they don't benefit from rules such as Elite. So really, you can steal the enemy's spell and cast it on them. So, situations that would be good. For 25 points. If you have an enemy that's taken one of the legendary spells, which they may do, then it would be nice, obviously, to cast one of those. There are some quite nice legendary spells. And with the 18-inch range on this, you don't have to get that close to steal one of their spells and then immediately cast it on something. It depends what the enemy has, really. I mean, it's not that great if you're just going to be stealing a Lightning Bolt 3 from somebody and then using that to shoot with. So, yeah, it's very, very situational, this Cuzlo and Madfall. In combat, it's all right. Only 5 attacks, though. And it's not individual, like, for example, Magua and Juice. He is individual, despite being on a 50mm square base. But Cuzlo and Madfall, not individual. So that means you can potentially double your attacks. So the speed 8 and the nimble actually sounds pretty decent there. So maybe you want this for a flanking force and nipping around the enemy, stealing their spells, casting them onto themselves, and then waiting for a flank opportunity to present itself, maybe. And then when you do go into the enemy, of course, -1 to the nerve of the nearby enemy units. So yeah, I'd have to try that out a few times before figuring out whether that's going to be worth it. See what kind of spells people are taking. Because even without the spell ability, it's not bad. It would be better if it had some other kind of ranged attack, though. I don't know if it has the option to take any other spells at all. It has the option to upgrade to a spell, so does that mean it can take the other spells as well? If it can, that would make it a lot better. Because if you're nipping around the side of the enemy waiting for a flank, you want something to do while you're waiting, not just chilling out there. Let's see, legendary spells. Can I take any others? I think once you've got one, you can't take another one, so Spell Siphon would count as the legendary spell. But can it take any of the other spells, though? You know what? I really don't know. I'm going to have to check into that one. Because if Cuzlo and Madfall could potentially invest in another spell, I think that would be good. But I don't think they can. Let's see. Guy says legendary units can't take other spells. No. Only the option presented here. So, yeah, I think it's definitely got something missing at first glance with that in mind. So, really, it depends what you're coming up against. Let's have a look at the formations now, shall we? So, are any of these new? Well, there's definitely one new one down at the bottom there. So I think Sneaky Stabbers and the Voracious Moorpack are the same. They're basically the formations to boost up taking Rabble and to boost taking Fleabag Riders, which were never that amazing. The Moorpack one, if you've got enough Fleabag Riders to run a Fleabag Rider Horde and 2 Fleabag Regiments, then you can, for not that high price, you can give them all Vicious and take away their Yellow-Bellied. And you really don't want a Fleabag Rider Horde with Yellow-Bellied. So if I had enough Fleabags, maybe I would have tried that already at some point. But I don't think they're the most optimal choices, taking that many Fleabag Riders. I'd rather take the Sniffs, really. And the Sneaky Stabbers gives you Vicious for your Rebel Regiments and Horde and a Bigot. So potentially I could take that at some point. Let's see, Carriages of Carnage. So this is a new one for 20 points. This is when you have a Mincer Mob Regiment and 2 regular Mincers. And each unit in the formation gains +1 speed, which I would say is very good indeed, putting them up to speed 6. So they're going to be faster than your average infantry, and suddenly they're on a par with the likes of Trolls and Ogres in speed terms. So I think that jump from speed 5 to 6 is quite significant. It stops the enemy being able to get the jump on you in a lot of circumstances. A lot of the units you would be worried about killing you in one go if you're a Mincer would be things like Ogres, because your nerve isn't that great, and all Ogres come with some crushing strength at least. So for only 20 points, if you're taking a lot of Mincers, that seems like a must-have. And that is everything in the Goblin section. So I think it's almost time to wrap this one up, actually, because I just remembered something else. There is a change to Nimble, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to actually find... Oh, here we go. When disordered by a unit in melee with either the Phalanx or Ensnare special rule, this unit loses Nimble until the end of its following turn. Right then, so that affects, obviously, Sharp Sticks. So if the enemy are thrusting Nimble units into them, then they're going to be losing their Nimble if they get into a bit of a back-and-forth fight. So if you can get your Sharp Sticks into a Nimble unit, I would say most Nimble units are going to be fast enough to be able to avoid Sharp Sticks, but it does make them slightly more tempting over the Rabble. Just a nice, subtle little change there that just makes them a little bit tastier. Just like the changes to Thunderous Charge made Phalanx units slightly more appealing as well, when the Thunderous Charge would only be reduced by 1 for having hindered charges, but Phalanx still taking away all of it. So another thing just to edge you towards those spear-wielding units. As far as it affects the other way, of course, Goblins have access to some nice, nimble cavalry units. So would it affect who you're going to charge into? Probably. And because you're going to be able to avoid them because you're likely to be faster than them. But when you ultimately charge into them, then because it's when you become disordered by a unit like that, so you have to take damage. So if you were to send a unit of nimble cavalry into the flank even of a phalanx or ensnare unit, it's not the act of charging into the phalanx or the ensnaring facing that does it. It's when they then disorder you by hitting you back. So maybe you'd think twice even before going into a flank if your plan then was to take the countercharge and then kind of nimble your way out of the way to attack something else so another unit can come in. So it's a bit of a subtle change. It could have wide implications on certain army lists and certain battle tactics, but I think that one is one that we'll have to see in action a fair amount before deciding whether that's actually going to have a big impact. Because a lot of the phalanx and ensnare units aren't fast. Nimble units generally are fast, so they can typically choose when they're going to be engaging with those units. So we'll see. You'll have to be clever if you want to get those spear-wielding units into the enemy's nimble stuff. It's more likely to affect things that are, let's say, something like a troll bruiser. It would be more likely to affect that than, let's say, my fleabag cavalry. Because a troll bruiser would quite happily just charge into, especially the flank of a phalanx or ensnare unit. And then if he then gets countercharged and survives, he then loses his nimble, which makes him slightly less able to get about the place. So it's an interesting one. We'll have to see how that plays out. So I think that is that. I'm going to look at some of the other parts of this book later. I'll probably do another video on the scenario changes and some of the other special rules or the legendary spells, or perhaps changes to the armies that I play slightly less frequently, like the Undead and Ogres, and more recently the League of Rordia. But for now, I think that's time to wrap this one up. If anyone has anything to say very, very quickly before we end this. I hope the audio was slightly better on this video as well, because I found yet another way to boost the microphone level. I'm not actually running this through the open broadcast software, though. And I found there's several options in there for boosting audio, but most of them don't seem to actually help that much. Dead Gamer says, I am an amazing man-beast. I think that's a fair assessment. And with that, I think all that remains to be said is look forward to future Clash of Kings detailed analysis of possibly even more pages as time goes on. And look forward to more games. In fact, I'll show you what I'm working on right now because it is relevant to Kings of War. Look at this. Dun, dun, dun. The Macrocosm Bonefields Kickstarter has arrived with my war machines, and these are Majestic Feet undead halfling crewmen on there. Let's get it really close. Is it going to focus at really close range? There we go. Look at that machine. Very, very tasty. I've got 3 of these. They can either be halfling volley guns or halfling mortars. So that's going to be fun. Look forward to seeing them. Right. The Hobby Habit says, thanks, Andy. Indeed, I deserve to be thanked for my just plethora of grade A quality content that's just been flying out of this channel for years and years now. So everyone, before I go, don't forget to check out all the links in the description, especially the option that everyone has to throw all their life savings at me on a regular basis via Patreon or indeed PayPal. And with that, I think it's time to say good night out there. Whatever you are, especially if you're a goblin. Are you sure you want to end your stream? It never usually asks me that.